So I didn't have much question about what I was going to talk about today because about a month ago I went to the Sakyadhita conference, Daughters of Buddha, it's called. And I traveled a long way and I spent 10 days surrounded by hundreds of Buddhist women and a few men. And so it seemed like the right thing to do would be to give a report from there. So is anyone here for their first time? Okay. My intention is to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. It's like relevance, we'll see. Okay. So first let me give a little background about this conference. 30 years ago, a woman named Karma Lekshi Sogyo? Anyway, Lekshi, who is an ordained nun in the Tibetan tradition and also a professor at some university in California, started this organization which has one of its intentions was to support the many women in religious orders in Asian countries that do not have full ordination for women. Now, in Zen it's pretty simple. You receive the precepts and you become a lay student and you receive 16 precepts. And then you receive the same 16 precepts when you're ordained as a priest, monk, nun, home leaver. And there's, none of us pay a lot of attention to the things that can happen beyond that, except, what kind of training you have and so forth. In the other traditions, especially the Theravadan tradition, there's a requirement that when a person is ordained, they need to have a group of both male and female ordained people from their lineage in order to receive the full bhikshuni ordination. And so there are many countries in which that's died out. And so nuns will be practicing with 8 or 10 precepts, and they have a lower status. The bhikshunis have, I think it's 349 precepts. And they value them greatly. So the status of nuns, we've heard something about that when Tenzin Palmo came out of her cave where she'd spent 10 years and started talking, and she started training women in that tradition, and she found that many of the women there actually thought that women were less smart than men and thought that women were not capable of enlightenment. There's a long history of that problem. And in many situations, the function of a nun was basically to be a servant for the monks. I've been in Cambodia, and it's mostly like that there. And so the drive, the desire for women to actually be able to fully practice in the same way as the men can, to devote themselves completely to the practice of Buddhism, has been pushing women around the world and women in those countries to find ways to make it possible. One of the things that they do, and I forget what country this was because it was quite a while ago, but a contingent of nuns went from one country to another country to be present for their ordination ceremony, and so then they had full nuns there. That's not everywhere. For instance, in Korea, the nuns' lineage has been strong and vigorous and uninterrupted. And actually, the Japanese tradition came through Korea. So that has to do with the founding of the organization, and the conference is thought of partly as an educational opportunity. Here in the United States, we have lots of opportunities. I could go to classes at Clouds. I can go to retreats here. I could also go to classes and retreats and hear teachers at Minnesota Zen Center or Compassionate Ocean or Dharma Field, or I could travel to many places, and whether a lay person or an ordained person, I would have lots of opportunities. But we're a rich country. And there are many places where a person is just ordained, and there they are in the temple. And they receive whatever opportunities are there. And they tend not to be academic. Or often they aren't academic. And so we have this conference in which a great many academic papers are presented. So I thought, here's a conference program, I thought that I would read this description of what we did to give a flavor. Well, we had an opening ceremony, which was really beautiful. They had chanting by nuns from the various traditions, like 5 or 6 traditions, in their own language and their own style with their own instruments and their robes of all different colors. And it was beautiful. Some speeches, of course. And then we have, I think that was Wednesday afternoon, Buddhist Women Across Cultures. Session 2, Buddhist Women of Hong Kong. And that day, we got to go home and go to bed afterwards. The next 5 days were a little more intense. So we could come to meditation at 7 a.m., and each day the meditation was led by somebody from a different tradition. And then there was breakfast. And here's this thing, there's a sense of generosity. We had to pay for the conference, which was a lot less than paying to get there. And there were scholarships for women who couldn't afford to pay, but I would not have dreamed of asking for a scholarship given who I knew was there, many of whom are very poor. So we received meal tickets. And the meal tickets could be used at about 4 different local restaurants for vegetarian meals, for breakfast and lunch. If you wanted supper, you figured that out yourself. Offering of breakfast was from Khan, Sinyi, Teresa, and Ku Min Me Roisa. I'm probably totally bungling the names, but they all sound kind of Chinese. So people and organizations donated money so we could have breakfast at our convenience. There were also snacks offered mid-afternoon. Somebody did that. There were hundreds of volunteers, mostly lay people, but not all. So
how many people at the conference?
I think it was about 750. I heard that sometimes it's been thousands, but it was plenty.
Where was it held?
Hong Kong, at Hong Kong University. And that was the difficult part for me. It's like, I have a policy of not traveling around the world. It's like fossil fuels. And then there's the money. But anyway, I went. So then we have a morning session with questions and answers. And this is like about 4 papers presented. And then we have an hour and a half for lunch, which is go find one of these places, stand in line. I figured out which was the best place pretty soon. A lot of other people did too. But let's see. A tea break and then workshops. So on 5 days there were workshops / meditation. So you could, instead of a workshop, go to a meditation that was led by somebody. Once it was by Tenzin Palmo. Did I go to that? I don't know. Chanting. So in the morning there was meditation, and in the afternoon there was chanting, and again it was led by some tradition. And if I wasn't totally exhausted, sometimes I would stop in at the chanting, which was in the main hall, and just sit and listen. And they were beautiful. And then at 6 p.m. it says dinner / tea. Like I said, that was on your own. And then at 7 to 8:30, we have Dharma talks or cultural events. Twice there were Dharma talks. The cultural events were amazing. There was singing, there was dancing, there was, let me see here. And I'm just guessing that these were all volunteers. It's funny, sometime when I was talking about going to this, I mentioned it to a man who teaches Buddhism, and he said, "You have to pay? They're not paying your way?" And I reported this to my friend Beth, who lives in Cambodia, who was the one who put me on to going. And she laughed and she said, "This is a women's conference. Everyone pays. Tenzin Palmo pays. Karma Lekshi pays. You know, the women who spend a whole year preparing for it pay." I'm not sure that's really true, but anyway, the point is, there's no spare money here. And yet there's this sense of generosity. So I'm going to read the sections. Buddhist Women Across Cultures, Buddhist Women of Hong Kong. Some of these were stories of individual women who someone thought was worthy of being remembered. Some of them were studies of groups. We have violence against indigenous women in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. I was crashed in my bed during that one, but I was able to read it because they made a booklet, a book. Morning, mindfulness across cultures. Afternoon, building healthy families and communities. Mothers, midwives, dietary laws, food code, another individual story. Buddhism and social action. One of them was about engagement of the deaf community, two situations in Taiwan. Most of them were very specific. The future of Buddhist education, which both included teaching children and included educating nuns. Female images of enlightenment, gender equality. Only a dream, or are Buddhists really equal? And most of these were academic. Monastic life in the modern world. Religious status of women Buddhist practitioners. Western Buddhist women, tradition and interpretation. And stereotypes, regulations, and obstacles. So We have, some of these have a little fire to them. A lot of them, there were interesting cultural things, such as, while they had simultaneous translation into 4 languages, with those little gadgets and the translators sitting in the back, a number of the papers were given by people whose first language was not English, and some of them, although when we read the paper, it was like very impressive, their pronunciation was difficult and I would fall asleep, which was very sad. But it was one of my experiences of being a minority. English was the official language. I didn't need the headset. Everything was in English, and if I couldn't understand it, I wonder how the translators did. So I went there because the subject of it was contemplation, cultural exchange, and social action. And so I went to offer a workshop. My workshop was titled Facing Climate Change Together with All Beings. But then I realized I was really going, because my whole thing about the support of all beings has to do with the way civilized people like us think we're separate from the other beings. And so I'm kind of like focusing on that. We are not separate, we are not different, we are not better, and we need to get together with all beings, because thinking that we're not is destroying us. So then I also thought, I'm going so I can learn from women who haven't had that same cultural conditioning. Maybe there are women here who actually just naturally are connected. And then as a result of something said in my fundraising process, I realized that thinking I'm just going to learn from these women, that's a little off too. And so that whatever privilege I have and whatever, the education I've been able to have and the monastic training time that I'm able to have, it's my job to offer that. So I'm not just there to receive, I'm there to give, which takes me back to the first one, but the first one you could mistake for thinking that, what white people do. I know something and I'm going to teach it to you. So, and none of this went the way I expected. One of these things, I had lots of encounters with all kinds of women. There was lots of picture taking. And women would just walk up to me and say, picture, picture. And I'd say, okay, sure. And I'd had the my camera too, so we'd get a picture. And then some more women would come up, and then we'd have five women in a picture. And it's like, okay. So I don't know why they wanted my picture. Maybe because there were not a lot of black robes there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Zen people, most from America, 1 from Argentina, although one of the Americans is really from India, but her connection is San Francisco Zen. So 5, and then there were 2 Nichiren nuns, but they wore black too, and we were all from Japan, so we hung out together. But that was strange, and I kept puzzling over it. Why aren't there more Japanese tradition there? And I know that sometime in the past there have been. And I also know that because we only have 16 precepts, we don't have vows of celibacy. We do handle money. We're allowed to handle money. It's like some of the others might have to handle money, but we're actually... it's no issue. Our lives are quite different. And so we might not seem quite real. It's like I saw lots and lots of the speakers were from the Tibetan tradition, which of course is where the conference originated. Masses of women, masses of ordained women. There were lay women there, but you couldn't tell, what their background was. Huge numbers from Korea. Huge numbers. Oh, I was going to read. We have, come on. This is not fair. I wrote them down. And lost them. So I will remember half of them. China and Taiwan, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Cambodia. Ooh, I'm not sure about Cambodia. India, Nepal, Mongolia. Every country in Asia. Every tradition. Several from Australia. At least one from England that I got to know. Darn it. Nope. Okay. I really do not have this list that I made. There are about 20 countries on the list. And every one of them with its unique style of robe and its unique color of robe. One group, I don't know if there are 5 or 6 of them there, but they're the Dakinis, and they're from the Tibetan tradition, and one of them gave a talk, and they looked very different. They looked like fabulously gorgeous, they looked like queens or something. Gorgeous women with hair in beautiful clothes, but formal clothes, like robes. And her presentation was about understanding that they too were clergy, and that instead of saying nuns, it would be appropriate to say ordained clergy, so that they would be included and not left out. And then I discovered that this woman that I made a connection with, she says she's not from England, she's from Cornwall. So it's everywhere. Anyway, she said her teacher said that she could receive that ordination, but she didn't feel comfortable doing it. Whatever. I certainly could see, I'd give her any ordination I had to give. She was beautiful. So, what I noticed about the culture, so it was a cultural immersion, and in their culture, the separation between lay people and monastics is really strong. And this was the first time I've ever actually experienced that. And then I came back here and I thought, I kept being surprised by things. So for instance, I brought this, they gave us this, they gave us this, they gave us t-shirts, they gave us fans, they gave us bags, they gave us the meal tickets. Ordained women were offered free housing. And what were they? You had to be ordained, you had to be celibate, you had to have your head shaved and wear your robes all the time. And I debated about this, and basically I wound up paying for my housing. And then I wondered, but that housing was all full. But it was sort of like, it was really meant for the fully ordained people. And I know there's some kind of a line that's you jump into that and it's your whole life. And I notice when those people, they do wear the robes all the time, and you've seen them perhaps, I've seen them on, peace walks or protests and stuff, and it's a really big deal when one of them shows up. If I show up, it's not such a big deal. And I've contemplated that. And I think there are two things going on. One of which is that not just wearing robes that you can put on, but that you're always wearing them means you're always that. You're always a symbol. You're a symbol of awakening. You're a symbol of wholehearted practice. And you're a symbol of Buddhism. And by wearing them all the time, you accept that. Because I can... Part of the reason I keep my head shaved is so I always have that, you know. If I were always wearing robes, I wouldn't have to have the head shaved all the time. But basically it's like, oh, you become, you take in the archetype. Or you put on the archetype. And so there you are. Anytime you show up, people can project all their stuff about Buddhism on you. And I've had this experience, and I liked it. It's never been negative. Well, it's been negative, but it wasn't because the person knew anything about Buddhism. It's because they thought I was weird. They had no contact with Buddhism. And so I've worn robes in places where people had no idea. There's like, is this a man? Is this a woman? Is this... And what's that weird stuff you're wearing? There are places like that in Montana and South Dakota. But then the other thing is there's a look on the face that I see, and there's a kind of radiating. And I really aspire to radiate that way. I don't think I do. But it's like, if you could be that person, like my friend from Cornwall, Sophie, if you radiate that way, then you wouldn't need the robes. But you wouldn't be carrying the archetype. You would just be, oh, look, here's this good energy. So it made me ask the question, what does it mean to be ordained? It means something very different for me than it does for them. And, well, it was Reb Anderson who said to somebody who asked that question, says, well, do you have it yet? Then you don't know what it is. Because in this tradition, we find out what it means. Probably everywhere you find out what it means. And I was ordained in 2005, and the ceremony was just a ceremony. And I said this to my teacher, and I said, it feels like nothing changed, and he said, something changed. So it was some years later that I noticed that something had changed. And what I thought at the time was that I was actually going in the direction that I thought I was going before. And now I've received transmission. I think what transmission means is I'm employed. I may not be paid, but I'm employed. It's like ordination meant becoming a student going in this direction, and transmission means, oh, now I'm a grown-up. I'm here. This is my job. And there are no excuses and there's no escape from it. And he told me, you can't get out of this, you know. He didn't use those words, of course. And there's a sense of support from the universe. And so it's like, it's not, I still have certain bad habits, but yesterday I had to dress up for something. And it was a funeral and they wanted people to wear bright colors, you know. Well, I could have just worn my samoe anyway, but I thought, I looked in my closet for bright colors. This was a problem. You know, I found some stuff, but it's like, oh, I just don't have that stuff anymore. Where'd it go? I didn't notice. I just don't like that stuff anymore. next weekend I have to go to a wedding and they wanted black tie. Not for me, of course. And I said to my the bride, anyway, via Facebook, I think, I'm a little worried about this black tie thing. And she said, we'll make an exception for you. I went, oh, good. There's a whole part of life that's like, huh? What's that about? So that's what I know for me about what ordination means. It's like some parts of life have just gone away. And I'm just talking about the ones that I don't miss. There are things that I miss too. Let me see. So one of the things in the conference was people who were there. I was time after time blown away by the dedication and the accomplishment of not only the nuns. My roommate, who is a layperson, was doing this incredible thing, researching nuns and monks in a very specific place. And it's like, oh, she had buddies there that were monastics because she'd known them from her research. But so here we have this woman who, she spoke up. They were discussing the whole thing about getting from being a 10-precept nun to being a bhikkhuni. And somebody from, they're called Métis, but somebody from there stood up and said, maybe we're happy the way we are. They might not want the extra precepts. And this woman, little picture here, stood up and said something quite fierce. So I was like, okay, there's a feminist. So I went and looked for her. I met one of her friends first, and then I met her. And her name is Aya Yeshi. So Yeshi. Oh, they have titles. They're Aya, or they're Karma, or they're Tenzin, or they're... It tells you which of the 5 Tibetan traditions they're in. So I learned something. Anyway, there's this thing called Bodhicitta Foundation. So she's a nun. She's in Australia. She is an Australian, very Western woman. And they have a practice center there, but the Western monastics are not fully supported. They have to pay rent. She's like really not okay with this. You're supposed to be supported. Now, this is like, I dream of being supported, but I don't expect to be supported. Because, of course, to expect to be supported, you step into a situation in which your entire life is turned over. The other Australian nun said she thought she would never go swimming again, and she gave away all her bathing suits, and suddenly somebody invited her to go swimming. She didn't know what to do with that. One of them was talking about climbing trees, wearing full robes. Their robes are a little easier than ours, like the sleeves. They don't have the sleeves. And I'm not sure about the rest of it. And so, or working in the garden or whatever, wearing full robes, and you just do it. I met one once in Canada who had a job, went away, got ordained, came back, went to her job in her robes, and immediately started teaching a group, which was a good-sized group, and took up a donation for me. I was doing the Compassionate Earth Walk, and and they all gave me some money. But mostly they raised money for some work with children or orphans back home, Nepal or someplace. So this is the Bodhicitta Foundation. says international socially engaged community founded by Ayayeshi, who's the author of a book. They offer social work in the slums of India to some of the poorest and most oppressed people in the world by sponsoring children to go to school, skills training for women, and running a slum education program for children. So she solicits money. She raises a lot of money to go to run these programs in India. And I said to her, don't you think it would be appropriate to take a little to live on? And she said, no, it wouldn't. She sleeps on her mother's couch. I don't know if her mother feeds her or who feeds her. But she raises money and she doesn't take a little percentage to support herself. Now, I actually don't agree with it, but I'm impressed by it. She said she slept on the beach. She knows a nun who lives in a van. And so, of course, because running one foundation isn't enough, she's trying to start a hermitage, Condroling Hermitage, so that Western monastics will have a place to actually properly train, to take all the time they need to do the practice that produces the person who has that glow, who has that ability to speak and teach. Yeah. And I looked at this and I said, this doesn't sound so intense as you. And she said, yeah, I got somebody who wrote it who's politically better. It's like this doesn't fight. But she had a little fight. And then we have Gita, the woman who I was connected with by my friend Beth, trained at San Francisco Zen Center, has a preceding training in one of the Indian things, and now is back in India. And she has this beautiful brochure for she's starting this place in India. And I'm like, wow, you're doing this? She seems really young to me. So they keep doing things, you know? How do you... I mean, those are just two women who just blended in, you know, except I happened to meet them. This is not the big famous ones who everybody knows about. This is like, wow. So I was a little intimidated. I felt like I've done nothing. And like my brochures are really not up to snuff. But there we are. How much? We should be about done. I was just going to mention that all of this and this conference and the Buddhist women's issues and focus on practice and the ability to, say, spend a 3-year retreat, or maybe 2 3-year retreats, which, you know, I met women and that was normal to them. 3-year retreat. Yesterday a mosque was bombed in Bloomington. I keep seeing this thing on Facebook that's asking for money to feed hungry children, and they have a picture of a girl on there, and that girl looks like my granddaughter. The mice are going crazy. I don't know why. The wasps are just coming up to me and stinging me when I didn't even do anything to them. And so I'm feeling really a lot like a householder. I'm feeling like I'm at war. I'm going, what is the stuff you say about, respecting, communicating with all beings? What, where does this get real? Well, they're stinging me, and I don't like it. And I have been known to spray them with wasp spray. I haven't bought wasp spray, but I have sprayed them with wasp spray. And I'm trying to figure out how to kill the mice. And it's like, I'm a householder. I have this place, I have this farm, and I have to do all that stuff. And that's the life. I think at one level or another, that's the life of an American Zen priest. And even if I didn't own a place, I'd be thinking about taking care of the whole earth. So whatever I do, I'm stuck as a householder. And I also remember in Katagiri Roshi, when he went off to Japan, he went for a sabbatical, and then he came back and took about a year and died. But people said he had been in America for a long time, and he was always a foreigner here. But he went back to Japan and he didn't fit in. And Tomoe-san didn't fit in Japan. You know, she could have gone back to Japan. She stayed here. She was too, she'd become too American. And so the comment was, you know, he's really a homeless person. You go someplace and teach, and there you are. You become part of this place, and then you're not part of that place anymore. And I don't know what that has to do with the whole ordination thing. It certainly doesn't only happen to ordained people. So I don't have a conclusion. I'm just going to stop and invite questions or comments. Yes.
I have to say there that I traveled through Tibet, Nepal, and I've been to some of these huge monasteries, 500, 1,000 monks, and I have to admit there, I've never seen maybe they blend in. I just never, maybe I was just looking for it. I just didn't see any nuns.
Oh, they might be in a different monastery.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I have to, the only place I remember seeing not a large number, but a number of nuns was, I was climbing this mountain. Right in the middle of it, there was a small temple, and it was manned by nuns.
Aha.
But you go through Thailand and see this string of what is it? They're priests there, and maybe I'm not looking.
You know, there's looking, and then there's looking in a certain way. So I know a lot of places they live separately. In Japan, there's some mixed and a lot of separate. To my knowledge, in Korea, they're usually separate. So that would be one thing. I also know that in Cambodia, where nuns have very low status, I went to visit a temple, and I could see monks, and they were dressed like monks, and they're out there, you know, begging. And I saw a woman at the temple who was dressed in ordinary clothes. She wasn't, the nuns tend to wear a white top and they tend to wear white. And there's various categories. I walked up, I gave her money. It's like I'd been warned. The monks will ask you for money, and if they understand that you are a Western monastic, they'll really expect you to give them money. But they become monks, and, well, Beth had a lot of opinions about corruption. She started the chaplaincy project she did because the monks wouldn't give teachings unless people gave them money, and so poor people weren't getting anything. So I know that there are Tibetan nuns, but I don't know if they're mixed together, and I don't know if there are nuns doing all the cooking in one of those monasteries also.
Well, in Tibet there, I think when a boy reaches a certain age, he is expected to go to the monastery.
Oh, for a while?
For a while.
A couple years or something?
A couple years, that's where he's educated.
Uh-huh.
I don't know whether there's any rule there for girls.
Does anybody know?
That was what I was told there when I was there.
Right.
I was visiting.
Well, I've heard of this in Japan. They do that. It's sort of like, you get. I think it's a few weeks. Every young man goes to the monastery and gets a little cultural training. So I don't know. I've read books that haven't said that. They've just been about women who just really, really, really wanted to be ordained.
Well, I'm planning another trip there. Maybe this to the east there this winter. So
You can watch for that. Yeah.
Make it a point to look.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
I've been privileged to meet a number of monks from Bangladesh out of the Chittagong Hill area there, and from time to time they send me news clippings of the violence that's being perpetrated against the villagers and women in those areas, and I'm always surprised that there's not a word in our media about the tragedy of their treatment.
Bangladesh.
It's almost as if there's a subtle effort to completely remove the Buddhist influence from that area of Bangladesh.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking Alan Senauke. What country does Alan go to? Clearview Project. I think it's Burma. And, there are battles in Burma.
Yes.
But some of these are Buddhists being violent against the other guys. It goes both ways there. So it's
That's
very...
not my impression in Bangladesh.
That it's just suppression of Buddhists?
Yeah.
Well, it's happened before.
It's a Muslim country.
It is, yes.
It's a Muslim country. I think that the Muslims there in Burma is being forced to go to Bangladesh.
Huh. Wow. Thanks. Don't know.
You mentioned that despite the fact that the majority of Buddhist monastics and ordained people aren't academics, that this was a very academic conference. What did you think of that? It sounded like you had an ambiguous tone of voice there.
Well, yeah. I had trouble staying awake. And I thought about how I would like to do it. In fact, right at the end, they had like focus groups. And there were two of them, and I got into one that was actually talking about revising the conference a little bit so that, so if you had a social action thing you wanted to work on, that you could meet with that group every day and work on it. And so that we wouldn't all go to all these things. And I think it was in that group that I heard the thing about education was part of the point. And like the opportunity. And, it was like for women to get to know some of the history of their own place, and for there to be praise for this woman who basically, what did she do? Well, she was a businesswoman and wealthy, and then she became a nun. And, and for this to be praised, and all the different ways of being in your culture, I thought that was valuable. And so I didn't know what to do with it. And that conference is never going to be in this country. I don't expect to go again, but I really recommend going. But it needs to be where the numbers are.
How about this dualistic idea of divvying up practitioners by gender? Is this something that you see as, would I be correct in thinking that it's really, these are ancient Asian cultures, and it's really, they're finding ways to make Buddhist practice conform to the culture, as opposed to, there's nothing really in the Buddhist teaching about that? Is there about the idea of very much divvying up? He ordained women.
Well, yeah, he ordained women after Ananda went after him, and after, 500 women marched for miles and miles and miles, and he still said no.
Okay.
But his reason for saying no, we give him a pass because he said the reason for saying no is because the Jains had done equality, like total equality, women were completely equal to men, and the Jains had practically died out. But I mean, it's one of the bad things. It's like, what do we do with this? So, yeah, we have those cultures, but the Buddha was complicit, and he did. Most of the extra rules for women were to protect them from things that would happen. For instance, a nun is not allowed to do laundry for a monk. But why she's not allowed to give massage to another nun, I don't know. You know, the not doing laundry part makes a lot of sense. Always going out in pairs, that would be for physical protection. And I remember thinking once that keeping them subservient meant that they would probably be fed, whereas if they were treated equally, it might have been harder for them. So, but it's all my speculation. It's like I want the Buddha. I want to think good thoughts about him. I don't know.
Well, even the idea of the nomenclature, priest, nun, there needs to be a division. We don't have that in our Japanese tradition here.
Well, we have. I mean, it's not priest nun; it's monk nun.
Monk nun, right?
And after being there, it's like, I mean, sometimes in certain situations I might say I'm a nun, but I'm not a nun. I'm a priest. And at Sahara they called us all monks because we were living monastically, but we didn't have all those rules, you know. Those guys wouldn't have called us monastics. I think celibacy is kind of key. And not having your own money is kind of key.
But is it that in some of these cultures a woman would never be called a priest? In some of these cultures, in these traditions?
Good question. I mean, there are teaching roles for women in many of them. Even in Cambodia, where things are really bad, Beth told me, achar. She wears the clothing that belongs to an achar. She stopped wearing Western monastic clothing because the monks kept going after her for money, which she didn't have. But as an achar, that's a teaching role. So it's better than the nun, which is like low status. In Japan, women are definitely priests. But then there's this concept, somebody, I mean, it's actually a career. You can have a career as, you know, you do your monastic time and then you go and be a priest. And there was this expression once, I might marry and become a priest, like, you know, monks, priests can have families. And then when Japan invaded Korea, one of their items was that the monks had to get married. And they wanted to turn the nuns into comfort women. So the nuns ran away. So, all of which, I mean, I don't know. But I thought, I have to talk about this, so it is what it is.